Well, there used to be a book called 1066 and all that. Well, I suppose that's long since out of print, but you know, I don't ask you to remember many key dates in you know, history, but 1066 is a pretty good one to remember. It's a one where you know, the Normans conquer England. Before the Normans conquered England, the Northmen, the Vikings conquered England. They speak French, by the way. Before they do that, the English spoke Anglo-Saxon. And when the Normans come over, France or French and English kind of merge. And we end up with probably around 60% of all English words, maybe a little bit more, being French in origin. Anything with several syllables to it is almost certainly French. Anyway, the fellow who did the conquering was William the Conqueror. There's a tapestry in Bayeux, France. It's a very long tapestry. It's over 200 feet, and very narrow too. It seems pretty likely here that William the Conqueror is portrayed accurately. We don't know how people in those days looked in most instances, but in this instance, we at least have kind of an idea. He defeated Harold II, the Anglo-Saxon king. And, you know, now one of the things about this, we've never quite known who gets killed here. That is, there's this fellow on the left, Anglo-Saxon. You can tell Anglo-Saxons, by the way, because they have mustaches. Anglo-Saxon who seems to be plucking an arrow out of his eye. And to the right, you have somebody who's being cut down. We don't know which one's a Harold. But anyway, this is the instant at which the battle is lost. Harold and his brothers are killed. And the end result is that William the Conqueror takes over. And the number of Normans, Northmen, Vikings, who actually conquer England is very small. So as a result, you're going to end up with a dictatorship. Okay. Absolute authority has to be exercised. There were a number of uprisings, some of them fairly serious, and the only way you could control this group of Anglo-Saxons who really didn't like Normans, who really didn't like being conquered by French, was to exercise absolute authority, and by gosh, that's what they did. And of course, the Normans, the Northmen themselves, were not very interested in consulting with people whom they had defeated. A form of dictatorship arose under William the Conqueror and his son, William Rufus, or William the Red. In any instance, these were not nice folk, and they ruled with very heavy hands. One day in 1100, though, William Rufus was out deer hunting, you know, part of the German heritage, and someone put an arrow through him. You know, his younger brother Henry rode immediately to a town called Winchester, seized the royal treasury, took the crown and all that stuff, and declared himself king. But even when he did that, even when he made this ride to Winchester, there was resistance in Winchester to him. So, I mean, he gets there pretty quickly. And yet, by the time he gets there, there are people who are saying this guy, you know, killed his brother, you know, he rode down here quickly, so it had to be planned. He wasn't the guy who shot the arrow, by the way. But frankly, there was an older brother, Robert, who had a pretty good claim to the throne. So, you know, what are we doing with this Henry guy? And a deal of historic proportions was made. Henry Beauclerc, as he becomes known later on, in order to make sure his claim to the throne was secure, agreed to put in writing what the leaders from most parts of his kingdom want. And that was he wanted to return at least to some degree to common German standards for governing. And we've talked about those in previous videos. There were some things tossed in. Now, this is known. I don't think it was known at the time. There was a coronation of the oath of Henry I, yes. But it becomes known to history as the Charter of Liberties. I don't think it was known as the Charter of Liberties. The idea of liberty in 1100s, a good deal different than today. And I just don't think they were thinking in terms of liberties. I think they just wanted to have their regular, everyday structure of government back, and all these crazy things that William the Conqueror and William the Red and, had done. Maybe we should do away with some of them. And that was a cost that Henry had to pay to keep the throne. Now, this oath, the Charter of Liberties, will be remembered and will form the base of Magna Carta. And we'll talk about that later on. So, a brief charter, a brief summary of the charter. And the first section says, know that by the mercy of God and the common council, notice that, common council. So they're going out of the way. First part of the thing, immediate, common council. The king has to take common council. This is a return to constitutional government. That's not just the whim of the king. You have to take common counsel. The king can do what he wants, but first you have to meet with your leadership. I have been crowned king of said kingdom, and because the kingdom had been oppressed by unjust exactions, that is the William I and William Red, had taken money, just simply grabbed it. I, through fear of God and the love which I have towards you all, in the first place, make the Holy Church of God free. That's not freedom of religion. The first movements against, the first effective movements against Catholicism, in England anyway, are more than 200 years in the future, almost 300 years into the future. So this is talking about the freedom of the Catholic Church to function without too much government interference. So that I will neither sell nor put to farm, which basically means rent, nor on the death of archbishop or bishop or abbot will I take anything from the church's domain, that would be the landed property of the church, or from its men until the successor shall enter it. And I take away all the bad customs by which the kingdom of England was unjustly oppressed. Which bad customs I set down here in part. Okay. So he says, I'm going to do away with all these things that my brother and my father did that are not so good. And just as an example, rights of women. Again, it would be overdoing it to call rights. That's certainly not how they thought of things. Remember, old law is good. So essentially what they're saying is, this is the way things should be. And this is the way things have been. But now they're putting it down in writing. But if a wife be left with children, she shall indeed have her dowry. That's the money which would have gone to the husband from the bride's family upon the marriage. And it would be returned. And, so long as she shall keep her body lawfully. And I will not give her unless according to her will. And Henry there says, I'm not, obviously William the Conqueror and William the Red had been selling wives, had been selling women. What's the best bid I have for this lady here? Comes with a good estate. And now Henry is saying, no, that's not good. And I'm not going to sell women anymore. And in fact, you have to give your consent to be married. And the guardian of the land and children shall be to the wife. So the wife, the idea that women can't have property, so certainly they can. And they can act as a guardian for their children. Or another of the relatives who more justly ought to be. And I command that my barons, that would be the equivalent of state government, restrain themselves similarly in dealing with the sons and daughters or wives of their men. Okay, and so basically, he's saying not only is the king not going to sell wives, not going to sell women, but guess what? The next layer of government down isn't going to do it either. There's a rule of law. If any of my barons or men commit a crime, he shall not bind himself to a payment at the king's mercy. Obviously, again, William and William the Red have been selling pardons. If you give the king enough money, you can get out of a crime. And so he's saying, no, the rule of law is going to prevail here. Everybody, it's not a matter of who's rich and who can buy their way out. The rule of law is going to provide, is going to be equal for everyone, not for peasants. That's a little bit too much for this time period, but still, it's fairly clear that the intent here is to make sure that law prevails and not the whim of the king. But the person who is accused, he shall make amends according to the extent of the crime, as would have done before the time of my father and the time of my other predecessors. Okay. And so, again, old law is good law. But if he be convicted, notice that, convicted. What does that mean? Well, obviously, as I told you, you have kind of a rough and ready jury system, and you've had it for about 300 years at this point. The jury system is going to function. You get convicted, you get convicted. Now, not all, in fact, probably not most crimes end up before a jury. The local lords, the local courts or judges have tremendous power at this point. But if you're convicted, the idea of due process, rule of law, is here. Of treachery or heinous crime, he shall make amends as is just. So essentially, if a local jury or local judge or local lord convicts you of some treachery or heinous crime, they don't get to set the penalty. It goes up to the king. So the king retains some right, but again, the idea of due process, of step-by-step execution of the law, is important here. It's not just somebody's whim. I forgive all murders committed before the day I was crowned king. That actually is fairly common for a new king to do. And those which shall be committed in the future shall be justly compensated. And notice this, according to the law of King Edward. Edward dies in January of 1066, and William the Conqueror conquers England in October of 1066, or 10 months later. So he's saying, we're going to do away with all the stuff that my father and my brother did, and we're going to go back to the law which existed because there was, people agreed to it. There was a common council. And this is a long-established tradition of vergild. Money is paid to the kin of someone whose blood had been shed. And this goes back in the 600s at least. It may have even gone back before that. The idea that rather than have all these feuds in which people get killed over many years, as I told you, some feuds went 60 years, and lots of people died because of them. You say, well, okay, so-and-so is worth so much, and I'll pay you that. And again, this is an old law. It's at least 400 years old, maybe older than that. So old law is good law. And the idea of a vergeld, that is how much somebody is worth, paying the injured family how much somebody is worth, is it's long established. Just think 400 years ago, it would have been the early 1600s. So that's how long that law has been in place. And it's an old law. And then, of course, I restore to you the law of King Edward. So again, we're back before William the Conqueror. We're back before William Rufus. With those amendments introduced into it by my father, with the advice of his barons. So yes, law can be amended, but you have to take counsel. You have to get, a king can change the law. Doesn't have to go through Parliament or anything like that, particularly because Parliament didn't exist in those days. But with the advice, you have to take the advice of the people you govern, or their leaders. And otherwise, it's not. It's new law, and it's bad law. And so essentially, this is how the this is this is a very important document in the sense that people are beginning to kind of put into words and put into writing the fundamental constitutional rights of the people of England. In fact, that they're doing this with a French-speaking royal family is kind of interesting, but nevertheless, this was the price for stability, and frankly, it's the price Henry I had to pay to be able to have his kingdom. So, it's an important document. By and large, it's a forgotten document, but it's an important one. Okay, we're going to go on to the road to Magna Carta after this, so that'll be the next essay. And then, we're going to Magna Carta itself. I want everybody out there to stay healthy. As I like to say, we're going to all meet again under better circumstances, at least I hope we will. And, everybody stay healthy out there, huh? Okay, take care.